I think the president's got a great head of hair. I don't think he's got a good barber stylist. I would love to cut the president's hair and say, you know what, Donald, Mr. Trump, President Trump, please sit down. Let me fix this.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I am Brian Chung, filling in for Yasmin Vasugian. That voice that you just heard, that was Steven Anderson. He cuts hair at the Executive Barbershop in Toledo, Ohio, and was one of the voters our friend Jon Allen spoke with during the latest stop of his Drive to Decision Day road trip. We're gonna check in with him. Plus, 6 years after Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stopped being working royals and left the UK, the couple now says that they're heading back. We're gonna talk about what provoked the big move and how Brits are dealing with the drama. But first, the US national debt has blown through another milestone, $40 trillion. That is more than double what it was when President Trump took office in January 2017. Now, part of the reason for that rapid increase is tied to attempts by both the first Trump administration and the Biden administration to get the economy back on track through and after the COVID pandemic. But why has the debt continued to climb since? And what does that huge number mean for American consumers? NBC News chief business correspondent Christine Romans is here to help me break all of this down. Hey, Christine.
Hi, Brian.
So the $40 trillion number, I mentioned that debt increased significantly under both President Trump and President Biden. So this is clearly not just a Democratic or Republican issue, but why did we get to this huge number in the first place?
Bipartisan bad habits. There is no appetite in Washington from either party to have fiscal discipline. There just isn't. You hear sometimes on the campaign trail, mostly from Republicans, about how they want a balanced budget. President Trump, when he was running the first time, he told the Washington Post that he would cut the national debt. He'd eliminate it in 8 years. It has doubled since that promise. And it's because of COVID spending under both presidents. It's because of tax cuts. It's because of infrastructure spending and green energy initiatives under Biden. Both parties have the things that they want to do that cost money, and they do them with no restraint.
And I think that there's this stereotype that Democratic administrations add to the debt, Republican administrations take away from the debt. That isn't happening in this current dynamic.
False.
And so let's talk about the Trump administrations, right? I mean, we're in the middle of this second term. You have the one big beautiful bill, which, by the way, is going to add another $4.7 trillion to the debt. But there was all this talk about DOGE and cutting costs. That didn't seem to do a dent, at least if we're using this national debt as a measuring stick. The other aspect of this, too, is that the debt accumulates if you spend more. But taxes are a big part of this, too. You can spend a lot, but if you collect more in tax revenue, that would actually reduce the debt. That's not happening right now because of also the aggressive tax cuts.
And you remember, you'll probably recall in the first Trump administration, they talked about those tax cuts that were going to pay for themselves by generating 4% and 5% and 6% GDP, economic growth that is so big that it'll pay for those tax cuts. Well, that never happened.
Now, $40 trillion is obviously an unreal number, but brass tacks, I think people look at that number and it is indeed very scary. Why is a large national debt an issue?
So a large national debt is such an issue because, especially when interest rates are rising, you have to service that debt. And paying the interest on that credit card becomes such a big part of your budget that it can squeeze out other things. For example, we're talking about the interest payments being bigger than what we spend for Medicare. You think about that. That's a really
mind-blowing.
It's a really interesting and scary kind of proposition. And if you saw rates rise even more dramatically from here, you're talking about servicing a pile of debt that's $40 trillion. And so now what are you crowding out? You're crowding out the things that governments do to keep an economy a middle-class economy. Maybe that means you can't spend as much on defense or on cybersecurity or on education or on fixing roads or, healthcare, Social Security. What are the kinds of trade-offs that the American public has to make because you're making these big debt payments?
But it's always, at what point does the music stop? Do we know if we're any closer to the music stopping? Presumably every dollar that we add to the debt doesn't get us farther from that problem, but we're not there yet.
When I had first started covering the Treasury market, and if you had told me we had a $40 trillion debt, my mind would have been blown. Honestly.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the red line is where suddenly interest rates start rising and servicing that debt gets more expensive and international investors get more nervous. And then suddenly you have to demand even higher interest rates, right? To be able to lend more money to the United States. And then it becomes really a confidence problem. And that run is ugly, and you hope that doesn't happen.
So for those that maybe have not enjoyed our high-level economics discussion of the national debt, what does it mean for them? If you're a consumer, you don't know anything about the national debt, you just know that it's piling up. How is that going to impact their household finances?
I mean, it means higher interest rates for you and for the people you love and for the things that you're doing, right? I mean, doesn't it mean you're going to pay more to finance a car? You're going to pay more probably to finance a mortgage. Credit card rates, which are terrible, by the way. Credit card interest is the worst thing in your family budget right now.
Pay your bills on time if you can.
I mean, yeah, no, it's bad. Those are already very, very high. But it's somewhere down the line, someone's got to fix this. And that fixing it could be suddenly 529 college plan tax advantages disappear. The 401k is a big, beautiful thing that has a lot of benefits for people that maybe those become more restrictive and you don't get the tax benefits of those. The things that you rely on might start going away. You might have suddenly somebody with backbone is going to say, well, we're going to have to change what age and how much you get in Social Security because we can't afford, we're paying so much in debt, we can't afford to pay what was promised a generation ago. You know, we can't, those contracts have to be renegotiated. That could really happen.
Christine Romans, thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian.
Our senior national political reporter, Jon Allen, is continuing his drive to Decision Day, trekking across the country with his crew, talking to voters in some of the biggest battleground districts. Yasmin spoke to him earlier about his second stop in Ohio. Here's their conversation.
Jon Allen, hi.
Yasmin, how are you?
I'm good. Let's focus today on Toledo, Ohio, right? You've been spending the day there in Ohio, Ohio's 9th district. Tell me about the race in this district and why you chose to go there.
So this is one of the super close races in the country. It is a rematch, one of a handful of rematches across the country in particularly competitive districts. You've got Marcy Kaptur, the incumbent congresswoman, just barely beat Derek Barron, a former state legislator, in 2024. And then Republicans in Ohio redistricted, and they added some Republican voters to this district, made it a little more conservative leaning, trying to get Barron an opportunity in 2026 to beat her. It's one of a handful of pickup chances for the Republicans. So most of the districts that we've gone through are Republican incumbents and Democratic challengers. Here's one where the Republicans hope they can really basically steal one from the Democrats, take away from the Democratic pile to help them keep the majority.
So throughout the week so far, you've been speaking to people in parks and diners, at a tire shop, everywhere that you have gone, right? You've been asking this question that if any of these individuals had a moment with President Trump, what would they actually say to him? In Toledo, you went to a barber shop and you spoke to the barber there, Steven Anderson. Here's what his answer was to you.
I think the president's got a great head of hair. I don't think he's got a good barber stylist. I would love to cut the president's hair and say, you know what, Mr. Trump, President Trump, please sit down. Let me fix this.
Did he say it to you too, by the way? Sit down, Jon Allen. Let me fix this for you. Tell me about this guy. Tell me about this shop.
Steven's fantastic. Might as well be doing a stand-up routine as he cuts his customers' hair. Extremely warm and generous, very tied to the community. He talks to a lot of people who are involved in politics, a lot of people who aren't, a lot of folks who live in Toledo, a lot of folks who live in rural areas around it, and really kind of, I think, has a feel for the social, the cultural, and the political in that area.
What are some of the issues that Steven is hearing about most when people sit down in his chair?
Cost, inflation, price.
The college guys all say the same thing. They've got to donate plasma to get a case of beer, a haircut, and a tank of gas. The middle-aged guys, the price of cars, the price of groceries. Senior citizens worried about health care.
He talked to us about tariffs hurting the agricultural workers, and of course the price increases on the goods that they have to buy.
I think the price of fertilizer, you know, the crops, we've had a rough spring with a lot of rain. The subsidies, from what they say, you know, they just really haven't been there. It's hard, and they've taken some serious pay cuts. One guy just completely got out of farming, sold his farm and said, you know, we've had enough.
Really, his entire message, or I would say his entire conclusion about what folks are talking to him about, was around this issue of inflation. Of course, we're going on a few years on that.
So one of the big issues in Toledo right now, surrounding Toledo, is data centers, right? Meta's got this $800 million center under construction there, which it says is bringing hundreds of jobs. Northwest Ohio is seen as a big spot for data centers too. But we also know that data centers are pretty divisive, right? There are folks that say, yes, this is going to be good for the economy. It's going to be good for jobs. But then there are others that are like, we don't want this thing in our backyard. What is this going to do, for instance, to our real estate values, to our home values? What about the noise pollution potentially from these huge data centers? What did folks tell you about this issue of data centers in the barbershop?
What we learned is that some of these workers are, you know, coming from across the country for really good wages to build the data centers, to do the electrical wiring for them, to do, you know, do all the things that are required to build and maintain a major facility. And so the folks who are doing those jobs, both those who are local and those who are coming in, obviously very much in favor of the data centers. They're paying well. These big companies, Meta, Google, et cetera, who are building these data centers are paying big money. And there is an economic development piece to it that is extremely important to some in these communities. On the other hand, we talked to one voter, Tamara, who said she really doesn't want to see these things popping up because, number one, there are tax breaks that are given, and then the prospect of higher utility costs.
Again, not fair to people that have to live each and every day. We work hard just like they work hard, and we should be able to live but on the fruits of our labor just as they want to.
And so there's a real balance here between the economic benefit that might be derived from it and the economic pain that may accompany it, and of course the short term versus the long term. Obviously, construction jobs are going to diminish once they're built.
So inflation, economy, data centers, anything else that really stood out to you in Ohio?
I mean, you know, just like everywhere else that we've been, the thing we just keep hearing is, unless you're a super strong MAGA voter, super strong Trump-based voter, there's a lot of frustration with the president for not keeping promises. You know, that's the way other people say it to us, that he didn't keep his promise to end inflation, that he didn't keep his promise to keep the United States out of war. And there's a ton of frustration. For some people, that just means, you know, they kind of swallow it and they're going to vote for, you know, the president's not on the ballot, but they'll vote for his candidates. For others, it means they won't vote for those candidates, or they may flip and send the president a message by voting for a Democrat.
Jon Allen, thank you.
Thank you, yes.
Just last year, Prince Harry told the BBC he could not see a world in which he would be bringing his wife and children back to the UK. But now, in a stunning reversal, royal news broke that Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and their 2 young children will be leaving sunny Southern California and moving to Britain. Their homecoming comes 6 years after Harry and Meghan left their roles as full-time working members of the royal family, and since then, the two have criticized the royal family and the monarchy in all sorts of media, from an interview with Oprah to their 6-part Netflix documentary to Harry's memoir titled Spare. So what's bringing them back to the UK? I'm joined by Daisy McAndrew, NBC News royal commentator. Hey, Daisy.
Hi, how are you?
So, Daisy, let's jump right into this. We're hearing that this move came as a surprise to even King Charles. What details do we have about even just the timing of this pretty monumental decision?
Well, as you said, it has been a pretty monumental decision. And yes, we are led to believe that when Harry and Meghan and their 2 children visited Charles and Camilla only last month in July, that it was not mentioned then that they would be coming over this side of the pond permanently or semi-permanently. In fact, we're told that the king was only informed on Sunday, just a couple of days ago, that this was going to be happening. And bear in mind, they are saying that Archie and Lilibet are going to be starting the new academic year in new schools. They've been enrolled in new schools. Well, that term starts in the first week of September, so they really have to get their skates on.
So it sounds like kind of a last-minute move here, but what is the motivation behind this? We know that Harry and Meghan have a lot of business ventures. Is that a reason here? Also, King Charles, his health has also been very much a talking point as well. Were those motivating factors in this decision?
I mean, there are all sorts of theories, and I think the truth is probably a mishmash of all those reasons. Certainly, we're told that Harry has wanted for some time for his children to spend some time in the UK to understand their British heritage. They don't just have any old British heritage. They are senior members of the royal family, and they've spent very, very little time, if any, at all in this country. So I think the fact they're going to British schools tells a story. Of course, many people have been putting two and two together and saying, well, it's obvious that the reason that Harry wanted to move his family over here was to spend more time with his father, their grandfather. Therefore, he must be more mortally ill than we believe he is. Now, personally, I don't think that that necessarily adds up. Just because Harry wants his children to spend more time with their grandfather and he wants to spend more time here, I don't think means that we need to be unnecessarily concerned about the king's health. Having said that, he is a man in his late 70s who has been fighting cancer for a number of years now and is continuing to have cancer treatment. So then there are those, Brian, who are saying, well, it's obvious that things just haven't worked out in the United States, that they failed somehow in their desire to build a home there and build careers, lucrative careers there, and they want to try their luck back in the United Kingdom. I suspect, as I said, that many of those reasons are the full picture, but most of us are incredibly surprised that it has happened, that it's happened so quickly as well, when, as you were saying, it really wasn't very long ago that Harry was saying he couldn't envisage a world where he felt secure or happy or confident enough to have his family here.
A spokesperson for the couple declined to comment on the reasons for the move. And let's dive a little deeper into that point, because Harry and Meghan have brought up concerns about privacy, have brought about concerns about security in the UK, which kind of underscored their hesitance to want to go back in some of that previous commentary. Now that they are going back, those concerns are still very much there, though, right?
We know how protective they've been about their children's privacy. Clearly, that is something they're going to be conscious of, that they're going to want to live in an environment where they can protect their privacy. We know they're not planning on living in London. They're going to be out of London. We don't know where yet. Rumours were that they were actually over here in June and July house hunting, but we don't know where it is yet.
Now, in terms of privacy, Prince Harry just lost a privacy case against the publisher of the Daily Mail. Not that this dynamic between tabloids and the press and the royal family is anything new, but do you think that's going to set the tone for what would be a lot more attention if they, once they go back to the UK?
Well, this is the interesting thing, because they said that they wanted to build a life in the States, and they implied that they would get more privacy in the States. In fact, the privacy laws on your side of the Atlantic and on my side of the Atlantic are very different, and you get more privacy enshrined in law here than you do in the United States. So, of course, the flip side of that is there is increased interest in Harry and Meghan over here. So there will be intense scrutiny of what they do, what they choose to do, partly because people are still pretty angry with Harry and Meghan. So there is an interest in how they are going to conduct themselves. And there's also a bizarre irony about the relationship between the press, particularly the tabloid press, and Harry and Meghan, but Harry more, because as you were saying, he has made it his life's mission to bring down, and these are in his own words, the British tabloid press. He pretty much holds the British tabloid press responsible for his mother's death, for chasing her for the paparazzi. He's determined that wouldn't happen to his own family, and he's been pursuing all these court cases against them, most of which he has lost. But the ultimate irony is that Harry and Meghan are incredible cash cows for British press, for actually global press, American press as well. It's estimated that just in the British press, they generate about £70 million worth of revenue for the British press. And I'm guessing that that must really stick in the throats of Harry and Meghan, because they are enabling the people who they detest to get very rich off the back of them. And again, that'll be something interesting to watch over the next few years, because Harry and Meghan need to earn income. If they're not going to go back as working royals, they have to pay their own bills. Their security bill is rumoured at one point to have been about $4 million a year. Add on top of that multi-million pound in Montecito that they're going to be holding on to. They've just paid £6.3 million, considerably more dollars in Portugal for a house. So they have bills, is what I'm saying, and they have to pay those bills.
Daisy McAndrew, NBC News World Commentator, thanks so much.
Thank you.
That is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I am Brian Chung, filling in for Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard and what you saw, press the subscribe button.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.